Welcome to part 2 of Genshin Impact Theory Deep Dives with ISLANDXD. Signora's inevitable death. Let's have a look.
Signora keeps popping up everywhere we go.
Turn it up slightly.
Liyue, and now even in Inazuma. It's great to see her since she's a cool character, or should I say, a hot evil character, but
True.
why?
She
The
do be
answer is
all of those.
simple. Revenge. To explain my theory, I will dive into her backstory and inspirations used to create this character. But it doesn't end there. I believe this revenge that she is seeking could cause her own death.
So was this before Signora died?
First off, why is Signora seeking revenge? Let's start off by explaining why she seems so upset. The backstory of Signora is detailed in several locations.
This motherfucker called that Signora was gonna die? What? That's insane.
Within the game.
Okay.
Most prominently, the Crimson Witch of Flames, the Pale Flame, and the Defender's Will artifacts. We can also find more hints in Venti's best-in-slot weapon, the Elegy for the End. Long story short, 500 years ago in Teyvat, there was a maiden in Mondstadt. She ends up falling in mutual love with the renowned knight named Rostam. For reasons unknown, the maiden decides to study abroad at Sumeru Academia. Before parting, Rostam gives her a Hydro timepiece as a gift. Soon after, the cataclysm breaks out and the world becomes a dumpster fire. Venti calls upon Dvalin to defend Mondstadt, and during the whole process, Rostam loses his life. Eventually, the maiden returns and realizes that her lover had fallen in battle due to a conflict between Conria and the gods. The maiden becomes furious and begins to harbor resentment towards the gods, essentially being super pissed off, and decides to burn everything in this world that seems unjust as the Crimson Witch. Later, she is tracked down by Piero, the first Harbinger, and is recruited into the ranks of the Fatui, receiving the gift of Cryo from the Tsaritsa. Now, because this is MiHoYo, nowhere within these items give a direct call out to the name La Signora. So are there any evidence between her and the Crimson Witch?
Wait, does it really not?
3 points we can use to make this correlation. First, the interaction between Signora and Venti. Second, the original inspiration used to create her character. And finally, the obvious transformation seen in patch 2.1.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So let's go back in time for a moment.
Also, it was out. She was out.
At the end of the Archon quest in Mondstadt, we get to see an interaction between Signora and Venti. The dialogue shared between these two characters seems to signify that they've known each other for a while. Signora calling Venti weak, and after Venti's response, she slaps him across the face and literally soccer kicks him even while he was already in a fetal position. With this interaction, it becomes clear that Signora literally hates Venti's guts, mirroring the description from the Elegy for the End, noting that the maiden now hates being associated with the wind. To further dive into why Signora is related to the Crimson Witch, we need a small history lesson, a trait that persists to all the Harbingers of the Fatui.
Commedia dell'arte?
Commedia dell'arte is a street theater of comedy originating from Italy in the 16th century. Within this performance, many characters were depicted to show the behavior of society. Fatui Harbingers getting their names from these masked characters, and La Signora, no exception. But interestingly, instead of a single character, the inspiration of her design comes from 3 different character archetypes, which isn't surprising since Genshin Impact is a fictional world full of intertwined references. The name La Signora is taken from a female variant of Il Capitano. Her personality is associated with Columbina, a cunning, financially adept, and highly intellectual character. And the story is taken from the witch. The witch's mask is often represented in a white color, depicting the moon. And in Commedia dell'arte, the masks are the essence of the characters. Although Signora doesn't have a white mask, her identity as a character is represented by her white dress, as noted within the Pale Flames artifacts.
I didn't know the Pale Flame was about Signora.
The moon is closely tied to the existence of Venti. Signora's involvement in the past signifies her connection to the moon as well. Mondstadt being the moon city, and Liyue translated from Jade Moon. This may sound like a reach, but the representation of the witch goes further. The witch is known to be very intellectual, knowing multiple languages as well as dialects. perhaps a nod towards the maiden's time in Sumeru academia. Also in Commedia dell'arte, the witch often moves about in a figure 8 patterns. This is to signify that the witch is related to nature and its elements, specifically that of air, fire, earth, and water. Air obviously representing Mondstadt, fire for her Crimson Witch powers, earth related to Liyue, and water being the Hydro timepiece that the maiden received from Rostam. With these correlations, I would theorize that Signora's relationship to the Crimson Witch is not a simple coincidence. On top of that, her transformation in patch 2.1 makes it kinda obvious. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I believe that this transformation foreshadows the end of Signora, if not literally, at least figuratively. If we take a closer look into her transformation, we can notice a very deliberate aesthetic choice made by MiHoYo. From Signora's emblem of the Fitsui, and even in her transformation, we can notice that she resembles a moth. More specifically, an Exilia putris, a flame moth. This aesthetic choice of the flame moth for Signora literally explains everything about her character and even her possible death.
Well, she looks more like a moth, not a butterfly.
In the real world, a moth uses the moonlight as a source of direction. That was until the invention of artificial lights.
In which case, they use anything that shows light as a sense of direction, including light bulbs. Have you ever seen a moth attack a light bulb?
Because they use light as a source of direction, the inclusion of the artificial lights ended up confusing them. They became lost and conflicted, and their obsession to light causing their own demise. In a simple analogy, the beginning of the maiden's story in Mondstadt mirrors the moth using the moon as the initial source of guidance. Khaenri'ah's technological advancements will be represented as humanity's invention of artificial light. These advancements causes the cataclysm and the death of Rostam. In confusion, the maiden now has a new source of guidance in her life. She begins her obsession for vengeance, and like the moth to a flame, becomes the Crimson Witch, a decision that could end up being a fatal one. Now, this isn't the only red flag for Signora. As I mentioned earlier, the association with the witch and the natural elements only encompasses air, fire, earth, and water. All of which has been checked off already through Signora's story in the game. Air signaling her time in Mondstadt as a maiden. Fire tied with her being a Crimson Witch. Earth associated with her collaboration with Zhongli and Liyue, and water representing the Hydro timepiece received from Rostam, which we now know as the witch's end time artifact, the beginning and the end of her love, and perhaps even the beginning and the end of the Crimson Witch. Now, these correlations are great and all, but there's a question that needs to be answered. What about Inazuma? Why is she here now? To answer this question, we need to look at the bigger picture involving the entirety of the MiHoYo universe. If you play Honkai Impact 3, you probably already noticed the Flame Moth or the Fire Moth. Inside Honkai Impact 3, there's an organization.
Okay, hold on. Is this gonna be spoilers, or is this fine for me to see? Is this like hella important to Honkai, or is this okay? We basically saw the video, so it makes sense. All Gnosis and 8th element uncovered. So I'm very excited to watch this one. I'm excited. Let's go.
This theory video will explain who exactly holds the King Gnosis in the game of Genshin Impact. I will also connect the numerous breadcrumbs left by MiHoYo to explain the identities of the pawn, rooks, bishops, knights, and even the colors of chess. I covered the chess theory before, way back in February.
Wait, somebody explain this to me real quick. When he says the colors of chess, does he just mean black and white? Okay.
Fast forward.
I was curious because these, obviously, the Gnosis seem to have different colors. Okay, that makes sense.
Colors
Thank you.
of chess. I covered the chess theory before, way back in February.
Because these are all different colors.
Fast forward 8 months, I realized that video is vastly outdated. So I decided to revisit this topic with new perception and information. You've probably seen or heard about the Raiden Shogun is the king theory. Although this speculation is very interesting, there are many issues with this concept. The basic idea is that if you read the elements on the loading screen from right to left, the Electro Archon should be represented by the king, with the final rook being the 8th element, which is currently undisclosed. Amazing concept, but again, we know things are never so simple in MiHoYo games. let's pinpoint the problems with this theory so that I can provide an alternative possibility that explains the identity of all the pieces in chess.
Interesting.
It is
Okay.
speculated that the 8th element is the unknown power that is associated with Daneslave. The problem arises when we go back to Daneslave's dialogue from the Travail trailer. This unknown power from beyond is not associated with the gods of Tevat. Since this power does not originate from this world, the representation of this unknown element being the second rook doesn't make sense. If it does exist on the chessboard, it should be on the opposing side. But for a moment, let's pretend that the 8th element does exist as the second rook. This effectively makes the Gnosis the king, which creates another problem within the fundamental rules of chess. The pawn cannot promote into the king, which means besides Raiden Shogun herself, no one can utilize the electro element. We already know this is not the case since many characters with or without visions can still utilize the power of.
That's a very fair point. A lot of characters already do use Electro. I am curious as to... I saw a comment in the chat, which made me think then that it'd make sense for like the Traveler to be the pawn because of the fact that they can change elements. The Traveler doesn't have a Gnosis, right? But my theory or thought is if the Traveler can change or like gather all of these elements, what if they can use all of the Gnosis in the end? Like what if the reason they get the elements and like level it up and everything is so that they can harbor the Gnosis in the end and use all of them? That'd be kind of interesting. That'd be kind of pog.
And when we consider the rules of chess, when the king falls, the game ends. So who represents the individual pieces? What is the 8th element?
Yeah, we could be Thanos.
Is there a hidden meaning behind the loading screen? Let's begin by figuring out the identity of the pawn. Many people believe that the pawn are the vision holders, also known as the allogenes, individuals who are gifted with the possibility of ascension into godhood. But even this has problems when put up against the context of the pawn within chess. The fact of the matter is that vision holders don't have a choice of selection, unlike the pawn, which can promote into any piece it desires. Allogenes are given a vision regardless.
Okay, now this confuses me even more then. I'm sorry I paused it again, but pawns can go into any piece? I thought they had to be queens. But then again, I guess, why wouldn't you become the queen, right? Okay, never mind.
Regardless of their preference, and they seem to activate at random. Upon receiving her vision, Noelle claims that she feels dejected because she obtained the Geo vision rather than the Anima vision. Kaching's vision was practically forced upon her against her will. She even tries to destroy the damn thing several times. Even Kazuha, who was in possession of his friend's Electrovision, could not activate it at will. It only activates temporarily, only to revert back to an empty shell. Now, aside from this problem, even the description of ascension to godhood is highly suspicious. As I previously mentioned in this video, it is my belief that the idea of ascension to godhood has some concerns. I believe that everything is a lie created by Celestia to monitor the allogenes and hinder them from understanding the true nature of this world. With these points, the most viable choice for the pawn should be the Traveler. Unlike the allogenes, the Traveler is given a choice. By resonating with the statue of the Seven, they mimic the skill sets and even the playstyle of its respective Archon. They essentially become a mini Archon themselves. The game further hints why the pawn is the Traveler. True. When the current Raiden Shogun initially gave up her Gnosis to Yae, she mentions, "You understand the value of Gnosis. Even if you sold it, I trust that you would have exchanged it for something of equal value." We know that at the end of Inazuma Archon quest, Yae does in fact...
Ooh, that's an interesting line. Well, what if Raiden had the pawn then? Even if you sold it, I know that you'd have exchanged it for something with equal value, like you do with a pawn. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Exchange the Electro-Gnosis for the life of the Traveler. The value of the Traveler is equal to a Gnosis, reflecting the true worth of the pawn.
What did that make sense for Raiden to be the pawn?
The Theater Mechanicus also add to this theory. You claim to have seen all the mechanisms, but have you ever considered playing yourself as the pawn? Questioning the Traveler if they ever considered the true meaning of their identity within the game. If all this wasn't already enough, Aether and Lumine are both wearing the colors black and white, an obvious representation of the two colors in chess. being positioned on the opposing side of the game. Now, before I start explaining the identity of the king, let's talk about the existence of the 8th element. To help us pinpoint the 8th element, we need to talk about syzygy.
Syzygy again. I love this word.
The idea of syzygy comes from Gnosticism, which Genshin Impact takes heavy inspiration from. It revolves around the idea of unification, basically two things being paired for the overall picture. This is represented many times in the game, the union of the two travelers, Tevat's internal struggle stemming from the Abyss Order and the gods, the cataclysm caused by the cyclical nature of life and death, even the existence of visions and delusions, the list goes on. With this concept, instead of simply reading the loading screen from right to left, let's see what happens if we pair these elements using the concept of syzygy. Once we pair these elements, we are left with Anemo, the queen. Now, is there an element that could pair with Anemo to represent the king in Genshin Impact? The god of time. In the world of Tevat, the god of time was often worshipped together with the god of wind. However, the identity of god of time faded from existence many years ago. Ironically, just like how identity...
I'm gonna just say, if the 8th element that is spoken about in this is time, then I said this from almost day one of Genshin. I always said it'd be so cool to be able to control time as like an element. I think it'd be sick, but I just couldn't think of a way that it'd work. It'd be interesting.
The identity of time is forgotten and super cryptic. The element of time also goes unnoticed inside the loading screen, represented by the loading bar and the background depicting the colors black and white.
Okay, motherfucker. You just clickbaited me inside of a video with an image that doesn't exist, Island. Fuck.
Represent the flow of time. So who symbolizes the god of time? The king that everyone's forgotten for thousands of years. You may think this is a joke, but it wouldn't be a theory without some evidence. Let's begin with Paimon's name. We can learn that the name Paimon comes from the demonology of Lesser Key of Solomon, known as Ars Gotia. The term Ars Gotia refers to the evocation or summoning of demons. It is my speculation that the entities with these demon names are the gods that were victorious after the Archon War. Basically, the end of the Archon War signaling the beginning of their archonship. Barbados, Morox, Baal, and Paimon, all coming from Ars Gotia, signifies that there's an obvious connection between Venti, Zhongli, Paimon, and Makoto, the original Electro Archon. Just like the example of demon names, the Statue of the Seven also reflect the original Archons from the Archon War. We can see this in Raiden Shogun's promotional trailer that Makoto had shorter braids than A, the current Electro Archon. These shorter braids can be seen on the Electro statue of the Seven, clearly indicating that these statues are depictions of the original 7 Archons. Interestingly, we can see many aesthetic references of Paimon on these statues as well, from the crown to even their clothes. With the name and appearance considered, the existence of Paimon should be on equal terms with that of the original 7. Paimon, who can control the flow of time inside the game, as the king who was worshipped alongside the god of wind. Not to mention, Paimon's crown is literally a direct identifier of the king piece in chess. The connection of the Statue of the Seven goes even further.
Hold on, what? Is it? Maybe. I don't know. It could be. Definitely could be. That's interesting.
Identifier of the king piece in chess. The connection of the Statue of the Seven goes even further. Have you ever wondered what implications these statues have? I believe that the Statue of the Seven is a larger, conceptualized version of a Gnosis. We know 2 facts about the Statue of the Seven. First, the traveler can resonate with the statue, and second, we can worship the statue. Recently, we learned from Raiden Shogun that visions or elemental powers are not given out by the Archons. That means the element of the traveler is not from the Archons but obtained directly from Celestia. If this is the case, everything starts to make sense. Just like how Archons use their Gnosi as a catalyst to gain power from Celestia, the Traveler uses the statue as the catalyst to obtain their elemental power.
Yo, the statues do look like chess pieces, kinda. They kind of represent like Harry Potter chess pieces, but they kind of do. What about if in Celestia there's like all 7/8 of the fucking statues? in like one room.
Powers.
That's interesting.
This
Holy
means
shit.
that the
Giant
Archon
chest.
and the Traveler both resonate with Celestia directly. We even know that after Traveler apologized to Venti for using the power of the statue, Venti basically laughs it off and changes the subject. Also, if the Gnosis and the Statue of the Seven are directly connected to Celestia, that may explain why Archon's powers are directly related to the level of rule in their regions. As people worship the statue, the power is transferred to the Gnosis, with Celestia being the main hub. Because a Gnosis and the Statue of the Seven serves the same purpose, I believe that they will look similar, if not identical. All the statues basically look like chess pieces with the identifier expressed at the top. If this is true, which Gnosis belongs to which Archons? If the Statue of the Seven is the direct representation of a Gnosis, we can come to simple conclusions. The animal statue symbolizing the queen, the Geo statue indicating a rook, and the Electro statue depicting a bishop. But what about the others? While I was staring at a wall for hours trying to answer this question, I came across an interesting idea from a user named Cole Loves You on Twitter. They speculated that the slimes are connected to each respective elemental archons. Out of curiosity, I decided to read each slime's backstory to see if there were any direct connections to the archons. What I found was shocking. Animal Slime's story describes the ability to float becoming special vehicle used as a method of transportation. Floating obviously relating to Venti's ability, while the special vehicle of transportation being literally the Dvalin Express. The Geoslime's description talks about the story of a golden Geoslime king and his relationship to gemstones and ores.
What?
Gold representing Mora, gemstones referring to Zhongli's knowledge in precious rocks, and the story of Ashtaha connecting to ores. Electro slimes are presented in two different variants, each speculated to be the two opposite polarities.
Makoto and
the
Raiden?
connection of the story of Raiden's Shogun expressed within Makoto and With these correlations, we can even hypothesize on other Archon stories in the future. The Pyro slime covers the idea of anger and depression, noted to be the most expressive slime, hinting at potential personality fluctuation of the Pyro Archon in the story of Natlin. Hydro Slime's external stature is known to be related to its environment, and it attempts to entrap its enemies, foreshadowing the authority and the power of the god of justice in Fontaine through the means of trial and tribulations. The Cryo Slimes are known to freeze their surrounding atmosphere to form a protective shell, also being considered as the freest species of all slimes that can cross oceans and seas, explaining the Saritha's change of demeanor to protect herself after the cataclysm and her diplomatic ties around the entire world of Tavant. And finally, the Dendro slime hides its true form to trick and hunt its prey, some regarding it as a slime that has been parasitized by some special plant. The identity of the god of wisdom, hiding their true appearance due to some force outside of their control. Judging by these speculations, I feel that these slimes are expressed as a direct link to the Archons. So, if these slimes are related to the Archons, how can this help us figure out the identity of their Gnosis? During my research, I've come to another realization that seemed very purposeful by MiHoYo. The appearance of the slimes are presented to us in pairs, which was obviously a premeditated decision. And when we order these pairs, it mimics the same order and the coupling we created on the loading screen from earlier. Pyro and Hydro slimes having the same horns, Dendro and Electro slimes showing similar obtrusions, Cryo and Geo slimes harnessing the same protective layer, with Animal slime having wings, perhaps mirroring Paimon, the king. If all these connections were truly intended, means that the Gnosi do in fact repeat just like the pieces of chess. King is the representation of Paimon and is paired with the Queen, the Animal Archon. The two rooks belonging to the Geo and Cryo Archons, two bishops for Dendro and Electro Archons, and the two knights for Pyro and Hydro Archons. Now I'm sure you're asking the questions, why was Raiden Shogun's Gnosis never shown? Why are there 8 pawns? Is there a pawn Gnosis? I personally believe that on a development perspective, it's crucial to withhold information about the repeating Gnosis as long as possible. If it does happen, I feel like it's years later once we reach the Pyro region to show the second night. Also, in my theory, the Traveler is simply a representation of the pawn without an actual Gnosis.
This is
After all,
head-hurting.
Aether and Lumine did not participate in the Archon War. But if I were to match things directly, the 7 pawns could be for each element and the final pawn being the original power of the Traveler. But since MiHoYo has officially confirmed that Aether and Lumine are both canon, I feel like they are just simple conceptualized versions of the pawn. And no matter who you picked, one belongs to white and the other belongs to black. Now, speaking of sides, let's talk about who the black and white pieces are.
Yeah, who's the quote-unquote good and bad guys? I don't think any of us are.
I want to emphasize that there's not a lot of information to go off of. These claims are highly speculative and consider them as food for thought. Now, with that said, to find the identities of the opposing side of the chessboard, I used 3 reference points. First, the story of each region and the quest item we received at the end of the Archon quest. Second, the concept of syzygy that I mentioned earlier in this video. And lastly, the idea that each piece from both sides should reflect similar level of strength. For simplicity, let's assign the white pieces to the gods that are associated with Celestia. This will effectively make the black pieces entities that do not belong in the world of Teyvat. For the pawns, 2 travelers, one traveling through the world of Teyvat and the other siding with the Abyss Order. Now, I speculate that the Black Queen is gold. With the idea of syzygy, Dvalin and Venti directly mirrors the pairing of Durin and Gold, both of their stories revolving around Dragonspine in the region of Mondstadt, and receiving the item Tainted Blood from Dvalin, which is connected to Durin, makes it highly suspicious. For the Black Rook, I theorize that it belongs to Ozio, the overlord of the Vortex, which shares the deep history with Zhongli. Ozio was summoned by recreated sigils of permissions, which I speculate to be from the same source as the corrupted karma that is used to create delusions. Liyue Archon Quest also rewarding us with the monolith fragment from Ozio. In terms of the Black Bishop, I believe Urabashi fits the bill. The serpent god from the Dark Sea, which was defeated by Raiden Shogun. But we never receive a quest item connected to Urabashi. So what's the deal? Considering that the Electro-Gnosis was never shown to us, could possibly hint that Urabashi, or the Black Bishop, was already off the chessboard, since it was defeated in the past. But we do receive an item called Funerary Mask belonging to Signora. Personally, I believe that this item is connected to the Fatui in the future and not Celestia. But again,
I think it's odd that we got Signora's little crown mask thing. I'll be honest, that's gonna come into play later when we resurrect her from the fucking dead.
All this is highly speculative, and you are welcome to disagree. For the other black pieces, I strongly suspect that they are beings that oppose the individual archons in the future. As for the Black King, I would have to say Daneslave. Daneslave's past with the Abyss sibling reflects Paimon to the Traveler, both having weird-ass capes and other similarities that are very thought-provoking. Paimon being the god of time, and Daneslave having the unknown power from beyond. But hold on a minute, what's the deal with Tsaritsa? If this is in fact all a game of chess, how can she be taking out the chess pieces that are on the same side? The explanation is simple. The less pieces that exist on the board, the more vulnerable the player becomes. But because she can't physically take out the pieces from the same side, this act of sabotaging and sandbagging is done through the Harbingers, the ones who are empowered by delusions. Delusions which are created from the same corrupted karma that is associated with the other side. In a sense, maybe Signora is the Black Bishop instead of Urabashi. We did get the funerary mask at the end of Inazuma, and she didn't have a vision, meaning she's not connected to Celestia. Her power of flames coming from when she was the Crimson Witch, and her cryo powers coming from her delusion.
Dude, there's so much going on.
Now we are left with the 2 players of chess. The white player could simply be the sustainer of heavenly principles, or Celestia. Obviously, there's some connection between Paimon and the Sustainer, but I simply lack information. But I do feel that they are not the same, but related in some weird way within the MiHoYo universe. With that said, who is the opposing player? I have no idea. Maybe it's just the Abyss Order. But since this is all for entertainment anyway, let me know your wildest thoughts on who you think the two players are in the comments below. After all, this is just a theory. If you enjoyed this video, smash like and consider subscribing for more theories in the
Holy shit, dude, this is too insane. The real Dendro, Archon, and Sumeru's lie. Let's go with this one. Another long one.
On who the real Dendro Archon is. Is it simply the Lesser Lord Kusanali as the game suggests? The answer is yes and no. If I told you that Sumeru had been lying for over 5 centuries, would you believe me? A secret so massive that confused the players, the characters, and even the translators. I will dive into the original translations, uncover the hints within artifacts and weapons, and describe the characters that MiHoYo created to foreshadow the events in Sumeru. Real quick, I want to give a special shout out to Tears of Themis for sponsoring this video.
I haven't seen... Okay, I would watch it to support, but I'll be honest, I haven't fucking seen Tears of Themis yet, and people keep wanting me to react into it, so I can't do it right now. Island, I'm sorry, but go download Tears of Themis using Island's link.
So who is the real Dendro Archon? Is it the Lesser Lord Kusanali?
It's Envy.
The simple answer is yes. At the end of the Inazuma Archon quest, many different translations of the game signifies that the Lesser Lord Kusanali is the god of flower, who is associated with Sumeru.
I don't like bees,
calling the Dendro Archon the god of wisdom also supports the naming convention of the Archons. Venti being the god of wind and freedom, Zhongli as the god of rock and contracts, Raiden Shogun known as the god of lightning and eternity, and Kusanali, the god of flower and wisdom. However, once we start diving into the details of Kusanali, things become fascinating. In the Pali dictionary, Kusa means a fragrant grass, and Nali is described as a hollow stalk. This information alone doesn't give us much to work with, until we look at the Jataka tales of Kusanali, found in the collection of stories in telling the previous life of Buddha. In his previous life, the Buddha was born as a lowly grass fairy, living in a humble clump of grass. A certain king who needed a new pillar for his home ordered carpenters to cut down a sacred tree. This sacred tree was the home of a tree fairy that the king knew and respected. Hearing the cry of the tree fairy, the lowly grass fairy comes to its aid and transforms itself into a chameleon, covering the entire tree to make it appear hollow and rotten, deceiving the carpenters that were sent by the king. It is my belief that this story outlines the entire concept of the Dendro Archon. Now, besides the name of Kusanali, the gender of this god is also a topic of confusion. Thankfully, Yaemiko makes it quite clear for us at the end of the Inazuma Archon quest. In many different translations, Kusanali is referred to having a female vessel, and in the Korean and Japanese translation, going far as to give the name Kusanali Devi, literally meaning a queen. With these indicators, we finally have some clues to work with. A certain queen that was associated with a specific tree, living within the greenery of the fragrant grass, coming to
where the
aid
Dendro
a
slime
certain
hides,
individual upon hearing their cry.
Interesting.
Does it sound familiar? The story of Viridescent Venera.
The VV
It is my
domain.
speculation that the Lesser Lord Kusanali, or the lowly grass fairy, is the Viridescent Venera. If we break down the story behind this character, we begin to see many similarities. The Viridescent Venera was known as the Queen of Hunters, being associated with the term Kusanali Devi. She would often take naps under a specific tree, signifying the sacred tree within the Jataka tales of Kusanali. This hunter was born and raised around the green foliage, plants or grass, leaving behind the subtle fragrance of wildflowers, mirroring the lowly grass fairy living in a humble clump of grass, and Kusa meaning a fragrant grass. From these descriptions, the correlation between Kusanali and the Viridescent Venera becomes obvious. And as if these connections weren't already enough, MiHoYo adds more detail to the lore that may explain what's really going on with the identity of the Dendro Archon. To start, the original translation of Viridescent Venera in Chinese means green shadow. Considering what had transpired with the story of Raiden Shogun, I feel that the meaning of green shadow could be foreshadowing that Kusanali is either a temporary stand-in or a simple spokesperson. The identity of Kusanali as the Dendro Archon is a facade that was created to deceive the entire world. The story goes further to explain that the Viridescent Venerer is the uncrowned Queen of Hunters, mentioning that none could ever bestow a crown upon the Queen of Hunters, since the only one superior to her was nature itself. Nature representing the previous Dendro Archon, the god of woods. And if the baton of archonship was never transferred or left uncrowned, that means one thing: the god of woods is still alive. Now, I know that according to the Chinese and Korean translations, it is said that the god of woods had died together with the disaster that fell upon the ancient kingdom. Still, the legitimacy of this specific artifact is very questionable. The entire description is prefaced with the word legend. And to add to this uncertainty, the description of the domain says, after a period of time, the people of this continent lost track of the past. Because of this pretext, it's quite difficult to figure out how accurate this information is. So, let's start cross-referencing. Ganyu explains that the current Dendro Archon is 500 years old. Although she may not fully understand the secrets behind the Dendro Archon, being over 3,000 years old and having witnessed the cataclysm, Ganyu's dialogue could be seen as somewhat credible, suggesting that the God of Woods is connected to Khaenri'ah in some way. But to what degree? To explain, it's imperative that we understand the difference between the calamity and the cataclysm. The calamity refers to an implosion within the Eclipse dynasty of Khaenri'ah. Within this dynasty, people were
BMO gamers, literally who cares? It's a character, dude. We literally have more male Archons than female Archons in the game right now. Doesn't matter.
Cursed with an incurable condition or turned into the monster of the abyss. This calamity or the disaster that fell upon the ancient kingdom
BMO can hate it all he wants.
Moments before
Don't play it.
the cataclysm. The cataclysm follows soon after. Monsters begin to wreak havoc across the continent of Tevat, which causes the war between Khaenri'ah and the gods, leading to the kingdom's destruction. It is my theory that the God of Woods was in Khaenri'ah when the internal calamity first struck. However, instead of dying with the cataclysm that occurred soon after, the God of Woods escapes along with the condition of erosion and death, losing his godly powers and even his sense of sight. Where am I getting this suspicion from? The blind boy that asked for help from the Viridescent Venerer. Immediately following the calamity that took place in Khaenri'ah, the Viridescent Venerer meets a dying boy that was afflicted with blindness under the sacred tree. Seeing that the boy was helpless and being chased by a monster, the hunter quickly comes to the boy's aid. Now, as if this was some kind of a joke, the English translation of this story claims that the blind boy was killed by the monster. However, nowhere within the original translation of Chinese and even in Korean mentions that the boy actually dies. In the original translations, the blind boy was close to death, leaving the story open-ended, just like how the death of the God of Woods is shrouded in mystery. I believe that the blind boy and the God of Woods is one of the same. It's very suspicious that throughout the entire game, the blind boy and the God of Woods is mentioned together only within the story of the Viridescent Venerer. And everything involving this story is hidden behind the concept of perception and deception. So if this blind boy is the God of Woods and is still alive, where the hell is he? As I alluded to in my previous video, I believe that the backstory of the slimes is a direct link that foreshadows the story of their respective elemental archons. Let's deep dive and uncover the cryptic messages hidden within the Dendro slime. There are some who see it as something similar to the Whopper flowers. The Dendro slime being the representation of God of Woods, and the Whopper flower representing Kusanali, hiding its true form to trick and hunt its prey. The God of Woods is incognito, waiting for an opportunity, and some regard it as a slime that has been parasitized by some special plant.
Yeah, we know that.
Parasitized reflecting the incurable disease of the God of Woods, and special plant possibly meaning the mist grass that I previously covered in another video, a plant that contains the power of corruption and karma that is used by the Fatui and the Abyss. From this point of view, might some cultures also see these slimes as having some special medicinal value? some cultures meaning a different region. And medicinal value, Liue, Boo Pharmacy, Baizhu. I speculate that Baizhu, the blind boy, and the god of woods are one of the same, slowly dying due to an incurable condition, being afflicted with blindness and having lost his godly powers within the calamity. Personally,
Oh, maybe the snake starts seeing for... Oh.
Baizhu might be in a similar situation like Daneslave. Obviously, Daneslave's curse is that of immortality, and Baizhu's condition is pretty much the opposite. But the main point is that both are being classified as an uncurable condition. Baizhu is a doctor of high caliber, having the knowledge and skills to cure many human illnesses. But according to herbalist Gui, we learned that Baizhu's illness is something that he can't cure himself. Xiao explained that Baizhu's mortal medicine has no effect on Adepti, hinting that the current knowledge and skills of Baizhu are only effective on humans. Baizhu being unable to cure himself because he is technically a god. Hu Tao's story mentions
that could be
Baizhu
so
for his
true.
part had grown ever more relentless in his pursuit of eternal life after meeting Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi was given a body that cannot die by the Adepti. And because Baizhu no longer has his godly powers, he might believe that the power of the Adepti could help him cure his condition, keeping Chi-Chi around with an ulterior motive. Now, what about the blindness? In Chinese, the name Baizhu comes from Atractylose macrocephala. Atractylose is a herb in China that is used for cleansing the blood. And out of its many uses, it is also used to help with nighttime blindness. If we take a closer look at Baizhu's eyes...
Wait, I have... Sorry. Genuine curiosity. What the fuck is nighttime blind? Isn't that just turning the lights off when it's dark? What is nighttime blindness? Anyway.
We can notice the obvious slit pupils. In relations to the motif of Baizhu, the slit pupils signifies the eyes of nocturnal snakes that are notorious for having bad sight, possibly hinting towards the nighttime blindness associated with Baizhu's name. Ironically, Baizhu's companion, Changsheng, is the opposite. Her eyes depicting a diurnal snake and her name meaning a long life. Maybe that's how Baizhu's able to walk around during the day, with the help of Changsheng. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture involving the entire MiHoYo universe. Before we dive into it, I want to thank Unreal Dreamer and the Honkai Impact community for helping me make these insane references. If you're unfamiliar, Su is a character from Honkai Impact.
I hope these aren't going to be hella spoilery for Honkai. They're not going to be hella spoilery for Honkai, right? You can see this, don't worry. Okay, perfect. Thank you, chat.
The story of Su closely resembles the concept of Baizhu, Viridescent Venerer, Kusanali, and even the incurable disease from the Calamity. To start, Su and Baizhu are both highly proficient medical practitioners. Su is in search for a cure to fight against the Honkai disease, and Baizhu is trying to find a remedy for his incurable condition. Su is also connected to the story of Viridescent Venerer. Inside the Honkai Impact 3rd manga, we learn that Su saves a boy from a Honkai beast. Interestingly, the boy mistakes Su as a girl, calling him the Lady of the Lake. Maybe even this boy had sight problems. Better yet, maybe the confusion around the gender of the Dendro Archon was planned all along.
Dude had a look of Zhao,
dude. In Arthurian legends, the Lady of the Lake is a fairy-like enchantress who fostered and supported a boy. The Lady of the Lake is also associated with a tree and King Arthur. Yet another rendition of the Jataka tales of Kusanali. Now, if we go back to the information regarding Kusanali in Genshin Impact, we learn from Vahid and Inazuma that Kusanali is the provider of Anahitian blessing. The word Anahitian comes from Anahita, a goddess associated with wisdom, fertility, water, and healing. Wisdom is obviously the god of wisdom, Kusanali. Fertility describing the Viridescent Venerer. Water associated with the Lady of the Lake, and healing coupled with Baizhu and his conditions. This further proves that the story behind Kusanali, Viridescent Venerer, Su, and Baizhu are all linked together. I mean, seriously, Su is in a bubble universe named the Seed of Sumeru, even being shown multiple times resting under a gigantic tree. Now, what's even more interesting is the fact that Su is associated with a character named Eden. Eden being portrayed with a chalice or a goblet. Chalice,
that's basically hand-fed to everyone. Holy shit.
Related with the process of alchemy, and Eden's code name is gold. We have another reference indicator. If Baizhu is correlated with gold, this may explain the reason why the God of Woods was in Khaenri'ah during its downfall. But honestly, the real question is, why is Baizhu hiding his identity? The answer is simple: Fatui. The Fatui wants the Dendro Gnosis, but Kusanali is uncrowned. She has no Gnosis to give. The Dendro Gnosis is probably still with the God of Woods, and I suspect that the Dendro Gnosis is the reason
I want to know
why
more
Baizhu
about this.
is even still alive.
Baizhu, we need to know
idea.
lore.
Archons have two sources of power in existence: their original self and the power of a Gnosis. After giving up their Gnosis, Venti, Zhongli, and A were fine. They simply reverted back to their original selves. But Baizhu's original self is currently afflicted with an incurable disease that affects the body. It's very probable that he would completely fade from existence once the power of the Gnosis is taken away. Now, to hide this truth and to protect the God of Woods, Kusanali plays into the role of the Dendro Archon, pretending that she did inherit the Dendro Gnosis. And this is possible since we learned from Inazuma that a Gnosis is not necessary to rule over a region. Even without a Gnosis, A was able to rule over Inazuma without anyone realizing. Now, I'm inclined to believe that the Fatui is more than capable of finding out the truth and taking the Dendro Gnosis from Baizhu. However, Kusanali has something that no one else can provide to the Fatui: wisdom and knowledge. According to Lisa, the scholars of Sumeru would do anything for knowledge, and Yae tells us that in Sumeru, the knowledge is managed as a holistic resource. No matter how corrupt or crazy the scholars of Sumeru become, Kusanali has no intentions of stopping them, because this knowledge is being used as a leverage to delay the Fatui from finding the truth and taking the Gnosis from Baizhu. Now, it's quite possible that the Fatui already knows about Baizhu and are just going along with Kusanali's deception. Maybe they're not taking any actions because the knowledge of Sumeru is invaluable to the Fatui at the current moment. Whatever the case may be, Baizhu is staying low, being supported by Kusanali, with a lie originating from the ancient kingdom for over 500 years. A secret that was so well kept even to confuse Zhongli, the oldest Archon. As we can see from Zhongli's first encounter with Baizhu, he had no idea who Baizhu even was. On a different note, here's some copium. I'm sure you've noticed by now, all the Archons have braids in their hair, with their elemental colors being highlighted near the tip. Funnily enough, Baizhu also has this trait. It's just extremely faint. Unlike Venti, Zhongli, and A, who has dark hair to help us differentiate the colors of highlights, Baizhu's hair color is green to begin with, making it extremely difficult to tell. But I'd argue that highlights does exist. Also, Baizhu's background might suggest that he's from Liyue. Even so, just like the initial release of Child, which stated that he was from Liyue, might be changed later by MiHoYo. I mean, come on, his outfit literally screams Sumeru. Baizhu's vision obviously could be fake, like Venti and Zhongli's, and Baizhu has a companion, Changsheng, mirroring Venti and Devolin, Zhongli and Guizhong, and A and Makoto. But again, copium. I'm sure we'll get some answers when Baizhu releases, or when we finally get a face reveal of the Dendro Archon. After all, this is just a theory. If you enjoyed this video, please smash like and consider subscribing for more content in the future. Thank you to everyone who helped.
That is very interesting. I'd love to see a Baizhu with different colored like main hair and then the little highlights. Also, for those of you asking why I banned that dude, it was basically because he's angry about 2D pixels being female instead of male a lot, and basically asking for different body types. It basically is just being misogynistic and weird. So don't do that. It's not welcome here. Thank you, though. I don't know how I feel about Albedo, Lord Misty. Have a good night. We gotta vote him out though. He is pretty sus.
Have you ever wondered what this thing is? Throughout the entire game of Genshin Impact, this symbol only shows up when
I actually have. I've also wondered what it actually is in general. Like, is it life essence? Is it because it looks like the Traveler uses it in the opening scene? It's not Geo. At least it doesn't look Geo. Like the yellow light. It's very interesting. So yes, actually, Island, I have wondered what that was a couple of times. Pog, tell me.
Associated with Albedo, and it is my theory that this symbol will not only explain his disturbing future, but why I believe he was a failed creation based on a god. In its simplest form, I believe that this
Was this before the event, dude? No shot. Island works at Mihoyo. It's the only explanation.
symbol represents the art of Chemia. Now that might be somewhat anticlimactic, but for now, let's start with the basics for our sanity, otherwise things will get very confusing. Art of Chemia is an advanced alchemical process that originates from Khaenri'ah, and at the current moment, only Rhine-Daughter, Albedo, and Gold can utilize its potential. A knowledge that focuses on the creation of life. With this power, Rhine-Daughter creates Albedo from nothing but dust. Albedo being created from chalk essentially makes him free of impurities. Now we also know that the temptation of this knowledge corrupted Gold, giving birth to a serpentine dragon Durin, leading to the downfall of humanity in Khaenri'ah. This is probably the easiest reference that I've come across since making theory videos, reflecting the creation of life and the Garden of Eden. In Christianity, God creates mankind in its likeness from dust. Mankind lives within the Garden of Eden, holding on to their innocence. Then the temptation of knowledge begins to rear its head, which is being associated with the serpent, leading to the exile of humanity from the garden. As we can see, the story of Garden of Eden symbolizes the exact concept of the art of Chemia. Now here's where things get interesting. Rhine-Daughter is basically role-playing as a god. God uses his own power to create man, and Rhine-Daughter uses the art of Chemia to create Albedo. This would mean that the art of Chemia, or the symbol, represents a power that is similar to the levels of a god. However, there's a problem. God creates man in his likeness, creating an entity that resembles a god. But Rhine-Daughter is not a god. She would have had to create Albedo based on a godly being. So who did she base Albedo on? The Traveler. The answer to Albedo's disturbing future and its connection to the Traveler can all be found in a single place, within Albedo's constellations. To give you the most accurate interpretations, I will be referencing to the Chinese and Korean translations, and I want to give a special shout out to Wind Valley for helping me throughout this entire process. First, the Flower of Eden, which is literally translated as the Flower of Eden in Chinese and Korean. This constellation describes the entire outline of life and destruction, and I believe that this symbol is the Flower of Eden. Let me explain. After spending hours trying to figure out what the Flower of Eden even is, I came to a simple conclusion. The Garden of Eden mosaic in the Mausoleum of Galla Placidia in Ravenna, Italy. If we inspect this design a bit closer, we can see that they are in fact flowers, the shape and colors also mirroring the elevator flower of Albedo. Having circular patterns with 8 obtrusions makes the connection very credible. Now, the Flower of Eden begins with a positive connotation, the creation of life, but it also has a more sinister and disturbing end. To describe why Albedo is a ticking time bomb, let's look at how MiHoYo uses this symbol in their other games. This symbol shows up in Honkai Impact 3rd and Gun Girls, the precursor to...
Wait, is that the... It's not the Tears of Themis symbol, right? It's not the... It's not,
Honkai
I don't
Impact
think.
3rd. When the Herrscher of the End, or the Final God, uses their power to completely annihilate humanity, we can see the exact replica of this symbol, again reflecting the Flower of Eden. This basically tells us that no matter what, the knowledge of the art of Chemia will cause destruction. The Garden of Eden, the ancient kingdom of Khaenri'ah, and even in the Honkai universe, all ends with the downfall and destruction of humanity. In a sense, this gives us more of an insight as to why Dainsleif was so skeptical about Albedo at the end of his collected Mussolini trailer. The art of Chemia has the power to rival the gods, and the symbol of the Flower of Eden foreshadowing the preordained destruction of humanity. So when could this possible destruction occur? Just like how Adam and Eve and Gold was tempted by the true limitless knowledge, I believe that this destruction will occur when Albedo understands the truth and the meaning of this world. And unlike everyone else in the game who might already know the truth or currently searching for the truth, Albedo is inherently different because he possesses the potential of the art of Chemia. Now, if we continue down Albedo's constellations, things get more interesting. A direct link which confirms that everything about life and destruction was preordained. First, the opening of Phanerozoic, basically meaning the beginning of the world. Then we arrive at Grace of Helios. Now, this constellation actually carries a double meaning. The brilliance associated with the sun and the blooming of flower, together translated as the flower of the sun in Chinese and Korean, symbolizing the initial creation of life in the world. To continue, the descent of divinity, which is a direct translation meaning the fall from grace, associated with the exile of mankind in the Garden of Eden and the fall of humanity in Khaenri'ah. Now, following this downfall, we arrive at the Tide of Hadin. Hadin directly referring to the Hadin Eon, a time on Earth describing a hellish condition that was covering the entire world, a direct representation of the cataclysm that occurred in the world of Tevat. And finally, the dust of purification, relating to the purity behind the soil of Earth, annotating the Albedo's creation after the cataclysm. Basically, the dust of purification explains the current point inside the story of Genshin Impact. Literally, everything about the start and the end of humanity and the existence of Albedo is explained in a linear fashion within his constellations. But we have a question that has yet to be answered. Why is Albedo a failed creation based on a god? To explain, let's backtrack to where it all began. God creates light, or basically the sun. And for the purpose of this theory, let's say that Ether and Lumine is the representation of Adam and Eve. Considering that Albedo is constantly being connected to the sun from his character information, I'd argue that there is some type of correlation here. Let's revisit Albedo's third constellation, the Grace of Helios. As
let's go back to that point.
This constellation annotates the beginning of life, directly translated as the flower of the sun. Now, Albedo's skill, a biogenesis solar isotoma, represents a similar pattern. A biogenesis meaning the evolution of life.
You know when Klee uses her abilities and the pages flicker in the book? Is that for the book in general, or is that just for Klee's ability? I want to know what it shows in Klee's book. That looks cool.
The Toma represents a similar pattern. A biogenesis meaning the evolution of life from an inorganic being, and solar being the light, or in our case, the sun, and isotoma being a flower. With this constellation and his skill put together, we now have 3 points of interest that can maybe help us connect Albedo to the Traveler. The initial process of creation, the light, or the sun, and the flower. Ether and Lumine being a symbolic representation of Adam and Eve explains the initial process of their creation. Now, the name Ether meaning sky and Lumine meaning light suggests that the unification of the two represents the light in the sky, the sun. If we continue on, we can also find that Ether and Lumine both exhibit a depiction of a flower on their outfits, known as the fleur-de-lis. Interestingly, this flower represents royalty when associated with the history of French and German cultures, and funnily enough, Albedo's title, Kreide Prince, literally means the chalk prince in German, again mirroring the concept of royalty. Now, if you're still not convinced, the connections continue. Aesthetically, Albedo and the Travelers both show additional similarities, like their light hair colors, the unknown curiously shaped emblems, and the same alteration of the star with the circular tips, which is completely different from any other characters in the game. Even the elemental burst of Albedo and the Geo Traveler is suspiciously similar. To top,
how do we not pick up on this stuff by playing the game ourselves? What? Holy shit.
it all off, Ether and Lumine individually begins their journey in Mondstadt, and as if everything was intended, Rheindotter tasks Albedo to uncover the truth by sending him to Mondstadt as the starting location. With so many resemblances, I believe that Rheindotter did in fact create Albedo in the likeness of the Traveler. But what did I mean when I said that the creation of Albedo was a failure? Well, there are a few circumstantial differences between the Travelers and Albedo. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, while the art of Chemia can theoretically rival the powers of God, Rheindotter is not a god to begin with. she is role-playing as a god.
True.
This means that the creation of man by God is naturally different from how a human would create a homunculus. This difference in origination could explain why Albedo doesn't have the ability to purify corruption, unlike the Traveler during the Dragonspine quest in patch 1.2. And because Albedo possesses the dangers associated with the art of Chemia, it further explains why Albedo is a flawed reflection when compared to the Travelers. And as an additional food for thought, inside the story of Honkai Impact 3rd, the power of the final Herrscher and the Honkai, which again relates back to the Flower of Eden and the art of Chemia, is associated with the moon. And if Albedo represents the moon, and the union of the two travelers signifies the sun, this makes them similar but also inherently different. Now what happens if the sun and the moon converge to a single point? The ray of light or purification being completely engulfed by corruption and darkness. The eclipse. This gives us a whole new meaning behind the Eclipse dynasty of the ancient kingdom of Khaenri'ah, its downfall and the destruction of humanity. But who knows? Maybe I'm crazy. After all, this is just a theory. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash like and...
Oh no, dude. You don't remember heavy spoilers? Okay, Star Rail. Yeah, Honkai Star Rail it says. Alright, let's give it a try.
This is Paimon, the lovable mascot of Genshin Impact. But are we taking her for granted? Because
yes.
I believe that this will explain her predestined end, which will be very crucial to the story of Genshin Impact. But before we get to the bottom of this symbol, let's revisit some of the dialogues that hint towards Paimon's unfortunate end. Within the Bantan Sango case file event, we investigate around Inazuma to rescue pets that were kidnapped. But at the end of it all, Paimon...
This is very recent then. This event was pretty soon.
Utters these words.
Pretty
if Paimon
recent.
had to leave, she would be really worried.
Yep.
That'll never happen. Paimon's just making analogy and stuff, you know? We won't split up. No way. I played enough games and watched ridiculous amounts of anime to understand that this dialogue is asking for trouble.
Yeah,
this could simply be analogy and stuff,
foreshadowing.
As she claims. But fortunately for this theory, or perhaps unfortunately for Paimon, this wasn't the very first time that she literally shot herself in the foot. This foreshadowing was already hinted before during Daneslave's Archon quest, immediately following the discussion of home. Yep. And it's good to have a home to come back to, isn't it? Hey, once you find your sibling, we should find a place to stay too, shouldn't we? Red flags everywhere. While we can accept that her dialogues are often spoken in a lighthearted manner, similar to these examples, Paimon has the tendency to wave her red flag constantly in broad daylight.
I'll be honest, that is very, very true. She does tend to not care about red flags and tend to spew them out anyway, which is kind of fair. Medop, thank you for the 11 months, dude. Thank you, thank you. And that is very interesting.
And if her dialogues are foreshadowing the end of Paimon, why? What could be the reason? To solve this mystery, we need to talk about a different, fairy-like entity known to us as the Seelies. If we dive into the backstory of Seelies, we can hypothesize that Paimon is basically a rendition of a Seelie herself. Within the records of Jiuyun, it's hinted that many years ago Seelies had a physical form, and the Drunkard's Tale described this form as having pale skin, slender fingers. If we go a bit further,
there's no fucking shot Paimon was a fucking Seelie, dude.
The loading screen explains that the Seelies were once a mighty race that lived to guide mankind, giving treasure to those who followed and appearing or disappearing on a whim. Super pale, slender fingers, tour guide that loves treasure, and oh my god, did she just pop out of thin air? Is this a coincidence? There's no possible way it's this simple, right? But here's where things get more interesting. Have you ever wondered why Paimon knows so much, but seems so clueless at the same time? I believe that this is due to a memory fragmentation that the Seelies experienced in the past. Thousands of years ago, the Seelies faced a disaster due to the Three Moon Sisters, separating the first Seelie from a traveler, causing their form to wither away and lose their memories. Now, if we fast forward, when we guide the Seelies to their homes, we're basically helping them retrace their memories. In similar fashion, I believe that Paimon's situation is exactly the same, and the journey we're on will slowly allow her to recollect her memories. A phenomenon known as involuntary memory which allows us to recollect the past with certain triggers that we encounter in our lives. Unironically, this was also hinted already multiple times inside the game, as if to signify that this concept plays a huge role within the story. During the Moonlight Merriment event with Goba, the labyrinth...
Sorry, I just saw the comment of the longest Sealy. And I'm just imagining we get to the end of the game and she just goes into this little fucking stone statue thing and it just goes poof and we get a big chest and that's it. It's just game over, dude. Credits roll. Oh god.
Warriors event with Shikatai Show
Long,
and through other
CD.
interactions with Dainsei. So what does this mean for Paimon? I believe that Paimon will recall her past through this concept of involuntary memory. And when she reaches the home of the Sealies, or the land beyond the dominion of deities, she will remember the cause of the disaster that separated the first Sealy from the Traveler. And I suspect that this unfortunate disaster will occur once more. And when faced with this predetermined ultimatum, Paimon will sacrifice herself to protect the Traveler. Why self-sacrifice and not the final boss? Because of the existence of K423.
Huh?
Let's take a look at MiHoYo's tendencies of writing stories.
So this is gonna... what a thing to pause on. So this is gonna be something for Honkai. Is this a big spoiler? Is this a big spoiler? This is a big spoiler. Okay, so I assume this is a big spoiler. Should I skip this part? It is? Okay, I should try and skip... Oh god, I don't know how far to skip though, chat. To all of you saying there was no Honkai spoilers in this, fuck you. Maybe like here?
Is this copium? Am I reaching for the stars? Two games being similar isn't something new.
Well, yeah, listen, chat, I have her, okay? I have her, so fuck you. Not a spoiler, but I have her.
And
anyway, moving on.
Again. Just like Paimon and Kiana, March 7th is the mascot of Honkai Star Rail. Obviously, Star Rail is currently in beta and things may change, but it's quite strange that all three mascots share the same story. At the beginning of the journey, March 7th has amnesia and has no idea who she is or where she's from. And similar to Paimon and Kiana, she plans to journey through
I'm skipping this section too, dude. I don't trust it enough. I'm sorry, chat. There's too many Honkai things.
Conria, an emblem that symbolizes the falling star. Actually, there's no official name for this emblem. We call it the Star of Conria because its relationship to characters that are associated with the ancient kingdom. And I believe this symbol potentially hints towards Paimon's sacrifice. After months of trying to figure out the identity of the symbol,
No, I want to at least read one word on this book to make sure it's a real book. Hold on.
After months of trying to figure out the...
Might feel it. Huge what? Is this your Hilly Chill fanfic? What is this? Okay.
Identity of the symbol, I had no reasonable explanation. Not until I decided to take a step back. What if the symbol wasn't just a star,
huge parking
but
lot.
Also a cross? Why a cross? Because of the existence of Evangelion. Mr. Dawe, the CEO of MiHoYo, is quite known for being a mega fan of the Evangelion series, and it becomes quite clear that the story of Evangelion heavily inspired the plots of both Honkai Impact 3rd and Genshin Impact, and within this anime, this star-like cross appears multiple times. Now, just to be clear, the producers of the anime stated that they included the cross because they thought it was cool. But if you ever watched the anime series, there's one obvious fact. This cross is associated with destruction and sacrifice, and I believe that this ideology has been directly translated into the game of Honkai Impact 3rd, making its way over to Paimon inside Genshin Impact. If we take this into consideration, characters like Baneslave, Kaya, and Albedo, who are represented with this symbol, makes a lot of sense considering their connection and their backstories. Now, within the recent Enkanomiya quest, Enjo hints that we could face a betrayal from Paimon. Is this yet another misdirection or a foreshadowing? Maybe it's both, just like how Kiana was overtaken by the Herrscher of
the craziest plot twist of Signora. The first part is Signora dead? If he just says yes, I'm gonna be so upset.
Let's take a second and go back to September 1st of 2021, a PAX that surprised us with the death of perhaps literally one of the hottest characters inside the game, the Signora. Without a doubt, she's dead, literally turning into...
Anyway, okay, so that was a really pog video, and a really pog sit... Fucking hell, dude?
Actions in front of our eyes, followed up by a system text which directly caused the Signora main subreddit to disintegrate into flames. But is this really true? All signs seem to suggest yes, it's time to move on, and no matter how much we inject ourselves with copium,
Was this because
the embers
Envy
of
asked
what
him to
could
make
have
this
been
video?
has been extinguished. So why am I making this video? Because within
Yeah.
Genshin Impact,
I remember seeing the tweet, dude. I remember seeing the tweet.
could have been has been extinguished. So why am I making
I do.
this video?
I remember seeing this. I remember seeing it.
Because
Oh my
within
god.
Genshin Impact lies a huge secret that could signal the triumphant return of our maiden within the veils of reincarnation. Believe it or not,
If he mentions Sumeru here, and say that Sido might be, or Sido might be something to do with it, I'm gonna lose my mind because I've been saying that for so long, and I really hope it's the
inside the
case.
world
I
of
need
Genshin
Signora back.
Impact, reincarnation already happened on 3 separate occasions, all exhibiting commonalities that are simply too distinct to ignore. These individuals are directly connected to their Archons, their ideals are symbolized within the Archon quests, and they all seem to lack a sense of closure. The first and probably the most obvious case of reincarnation is the story of Vanessa. After her death and ascension, we can confirm that she returns as a falcon, and in real life, a falcon is a symbolic embodiment of freedom itself. On top of this, one of the core factors for a bird to take flight is, of course, the wind. But here's where things get more interesting. Vanessa's view of freedom was never actualized in her lifetime. While in captivity, Venti pleads for her to accept his help to break out, guaranteeing the freedom of her people. But she declines, stating freedom given freely is only a guise for another shackle. Vanessa believes that true freedom had to be earned. However, later in the rebellion, we can see that Venti lends her a hand anyway in order to save her life and to protect the people. Which means, at that very moment, the pretext of liberation that Vanessa wished for had already faded from existence because of the intervention by the Animal Archon. To make things very clear, although a falcon represents freedom, it's only made possible because of the wind. In addition, Mondstadt may represent freedom, but it all originated from the Animal Archon. And in a symbolic sense for both the falcon and Mondstadt, they were never really free because of their reliance on another entity. However, fortunately for Vanessa, I speculate she does obtain closure much later in the story. If we look at the end of the chapter, we can notice that the Traveler is harnessing the Geo elements, meaning this interaction between Venti, Traveler, and the Falcon occurs after the conclusion of Mondstadt's Archon quest. In seeing this, perhaps to signify acceptance or acknowledgement, the Falcon flies away into the distance for the final time. If you really think about it, it all makes sense since Vanessa wanted people to take hold of their own freedom, and Venti is now technically no longer an Archon due to the lack of his Gnosis, giving true liberation to Mondstadt. And so, with this example, we may have found some hints as to what makes reincarnation possible. First, the character's story is linked to the Archon. Second, the reincarnation resembles the concept of the region and its elements. And finally, it all stems from a lack of closure, which eventually resolves itself. For us to solidify the claim that Signora would return back into the game, we need to first confirm that the reincarnation of Vanessa was not a fluke or a coincidence. Let's confirm our hypothesis by exploring the second example within the region of Liyue. The uncanny link.
They're not saying that Vanessa's the Luke's hawk, right? That's not what's being said right now.
Of Vanessa was not a fluke or a coincidence. Let's confirm our hypothesis by exploring the second example within the region of Liyue. The uncanny link between Ningguang and none other than the god of dust herself.
I saw somebody say that. I was confused.
It is my belief that Ningguang is the reincarnation of Guizhong, but it's impossible to prove this notion because of the lack of confirmation. However, the hints within the game makes things convincingly obvious. Glazed lilies, which are a core item used for Ningguang's ascension, has a deep connection between Zhongli and Guizhong. Ningguang's best-in-slot weapon, the Memory of Dust, was a gift which also connects back to Zhongli and Guizhong. And just by playing through the story, we learn that both Ningguang and Guizhong are highly intellectual and excel in engineering.
Yeah, the God of Dust,
the list
right?
of connections between these two characters are endless, even from their favorite dish being identical to how Ningguang's hair color shifts similar to that of the other gods. But if Ningguang is in fact Ningguang's
oh my god, it does. She's a hidden 5-star.
Hair color shifts
hidden 5-star.
Similar to that of the other gods. But if Ningguang is in fact the reincarnation of Guizhong, why? Because just like how Vanessa had her own perspective of liberation, Guizhong's view on guiding a nation was different from Zhongli. What many people fail to realize is that in the past, Liyue was ruled by two gods, Zhongli and Guizhong, and from Venti's voice line, it becomes clear that the perception of Zhongli has greatly changed over the years, suggesting that Zhongli used to be a blockhead who couldn't understand human feelings and basically a musclehead who ruled with strength, power, and rules. In contrast,
Interesting,
Guizhong was
okay.
the one who actively tried to understand and nurture humans through the process of knowledge, similar to the sentiments and ideals of Ningguang in this story. If you recall, the reason why the Jade Chamber even existed in the first place was to showcase human knowledge and ingenuity. In hindsight, it was the main reason as to how humans became independent. And this concept can also be found within the Memory of Dust, from the pledge and challenge made between Guizhong and Zhongli, which would explain the reason why Zhongli would spend thousands of years walking alongside humans, all in hopes to better understand them and to search for a way to actualize Guizhong's final wish, to nurture humanity
he's smart,
and their
dude.
independence through knowledge. And just like in Mondstadt, Liyue Archon Quest does bring closure to Guizhong's final wish, through the reincarnation of Ningguang and of course with the help of the Traveler. With all this in mind, let's go back to the three main requirements for reincarnation. First, just like how Vanessa's story originates from the concept of freedom and Venti, Guizhong's reincarnation stems from an informal contract connecting to Zhongli. Second, the falcon is connected to Animo, which uses the wind for flight to signify its freedom. Ningguang, being associated with Geo, utilizes oars to create the Jade Chamber, which is the symbol for independence. And finally, both cases of reincarnation occur again with the notion of unfinished business. From these patterns, I would theorize that Signora's reincarnation could be possible if the concept of Snezhnaya and the view of the Tsaritsa co-align with their story. But
Don't say
we could
could be.
argue that this is only possible if the patterns remain consistent across all the regions. So the question remains, does this pattern hold true for the region of Inazuma? Before you start thinking I'm insane and straight up overdosed on copium, you're gonna have to let me explain myself, because things are about to get a bit more complicated. Let's talk about the final example of reincarnation in Inazuma that will tie everything together. And who's the final person? Of course, Makoto. On the surface, the reincarnation of Makoto might not seem so direct, but we learned during Raiden Shogun Story Quest that the sacred Sakura is in fact the embodiment of Makoto. Kazari stated during the Yogo cleansing quest that the tree can tell who's performing the ritual, suggesting that the tree might be sentient. With that said, let us once again try to confirm our hypothesis. Mondstadt and Venti's false sense
Tree banner when?
of freedom resulted in Vanessa's true liberation. Liyue and Zhongli's perception of rule transpired into Guizhong's idea of independence, and now Makoto's reincarnation stems from the difference in opinion between A and Makoto. Next, just like how the falcon relied on the wind and how Ningguang utilized oars to construct the Jade Chamber, the sacred Sakura, or to be more specific, the Thunder Sakura, which is basically the side branch, uses lightning to ward off evil and cleanse the impurities of the land in Inazuma. Basically, just like the falcon and Ningguang, the protection of Inazuma offered by the sacred Sakura was solely dependent on the element of Electro. Lastly, as we learn from the story quest, Makoto's reincarnation occurs again due to the lack of closure associated with A's perspective of eternity. And of course, just like everyone else, Makoto's internal conflict does find a resolution. Just like how Vanessa wanted people to take hold of their own freedom, the people of Mondstadt themselves do bring about this change. Similarly, how Guizhong wished for humans to be more knowledgeable and independent, Ningguang fills this role with
I'm sorry. Give us this skin. Please, look at the little horns, dude. Look at the little horns at the top and the colors. I want the skin.
For humans to be more knowledgeable and independent, Ningguang fills this role with her intelligence and engineering. And almost in an eerie-like way, Makoto and Inazuma follows a similar pattern.
And if Makoto's ever a playable character, I want the tree as a skin.
Breaking away the mold of eternal stasis, using the sacred Sakura with the manipulation of time, convincing A to accept a new perspective of eternity moving forward. So again, let's simplify everything from all this craziness. The character to be reincarnated must have a direct link to their Archon. Their new reincarnated forms must reflect the idea of their region and its elements, and they must have an attachment to this world from a lack of closure. Let's see how Signora fares when put up against a template that could hint towards reincarnation. The first requirement being her connection to an Archon. For
me with it.
Signora, it's pretty obvious, the Tsaritsa. But quite frankly, this alone wouldn't be enough because this would mean that every member of the Fatui would be nominated. However, Signora's case is very fascinating because her backstory is identical to the Tsaritsa, both characters changing their perspective after the cataclysm. Before Signora completely lost hope in the world and became a harbinger, she used to live a peaceful life in Mondstadt. But after the destruction 500 years ago, her novel life spirals into the path of chaos and vengeance. And what's even weirder is that her attitude towards Venti and Mondstadt felt rather personal. Coincidentally, Venti himself explained that Tsaritsa's demeanor also changed after the cataclysm, harboring discontent towards the world and to himself. Child also hinted that Tsaritsa used to be a gentle soul, who had to harden herself to declare war because she wished for peace. As we can see, the story of Signora and the history of Tsaritsa seems to directly mirror each other, both choosing to embark down a path of destruction.
Wait, chat, are these fun arts? These are fun arts, or these are from like the manga or something?
Moving along, Signora's reincarnated form should symbolize the concept of the region and the element. Now, whether she would return as
incredible
a human
fun
or
art.
something entirely different like an animal or a tree, we don't know.
Holy shit.
But one thing is very clear from her character design, the symbolic representation of a fire moth. The fire moth chases light or a path which causes their self-destruction. Signora's light will undoubtedly be Tsaritsa, but just like the previous examples of reincarnation, the cryo, cocoon, or chrysalis plays a factor which halts Signora from actualizing her ideals. And if you recall, it's very similar to how Tsaritsa had to harden her feelings to wage war against the entire world. And now for the final requirement, the lack of closure. If you're familiar with Signora's story,
oh my god,
her
look
whole
at the
downfall
art, dude.
stems from a very simple but devastating reason, the heart-wrenching sense of grief fueled by the death of her love, Rostam. From everything explained, I feel that Signora's reincarnation has a high probability of occurring. But let's talk about what really matters. Will she be playable? For a character to be playable, there are a few speculative requirements as well. First, they need to exist in the current timeline. Second, they should have a constellation. And finally, probably most important, they should have a vision. So if Signora died in Inazuma, how could she be playable in the current timeline? I'd argue that since the existence of time manipulation was confirmed during Raiden Shogun's story, theoretically the Signora of the past in Mondstadt, the present in Inazuma, and the future reincarnation in Shinashnaya can coexist in a point of singularity, just like in the case of Makoto. We also learn from the story of Leonard during the Unreconciled Stars event that it's possible for anyone who existed in this world to have a constellation. And finally, it's been confirmed that Archons do not hand out visions. That could mean Signora might obtain a vision randomly, similar to how Ningguang got her vision in the story. A cryo vision would fit her perfectly to match the motif of Tsaritsa, as well as the other cryo characters that are riddled with internal struggles. But what confuses me the most is why Tsaritsa is not taking any action after a death of a harbinger. Was this all part of her plan?
You're fucking gonna leave me like that. Really, dude. Oh, that was so good. Oh, shit, dude. That was really good. Island, thank you so much for letting me watch those videos and react to those on stream. And if I do put them on YouTube, then obviously links in the description below for Island's videos and channel. If you don't already follow Island, then you definitely should be, especially if you enjoy watching Genshin lore.